Okay, we will call to order the May 16th, 2018 meeting of the Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission. Our first order of business is the agenda itself. Mr. Hadley, I think you have one suggested change to our agenda.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. What staff would suggest is that item 4, since we probably will have a little longer discussion on that, courtesy for item 5 and 6, that we swap item 4 and drop it to the bottom of the agenda, if that's all right with the applicant as well. It just would be probably a little easier process to have that discussion at the end of the meeting.
Anybody have any problem with that? Anything else?
That's it, sir.
Anybody else? Anything? Let's have a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Okay. We have the minutes for last meeting. Any corrections or additions to those minutes? Okay.
On page 2, that the Happy Hounds that daycare, the motion there, it should have been by Dean Frantic, not Gene Frantic.
Okay. All right, we have that correction. Anything else? Let's have a motion for approval of the minutes as amended.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any more discussion on the minutes? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved. That will move to our regular agenda. Item number 1 is an application for a special use permit. Mr. Hadley, you want to introduce that for us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This item is a special use permit for a telecommunications tower along 34th. This item was actually approved a little over 2 years ago, and the special use permit actually expired. It's in the ETZ right off of 34th between 10th Avenue West and Highway 22. Basically, it's a large field at this point. There was discussion at one time of that whole area being developed, but I think everybody is aware of. This is about 100 feet off of the 100 feet off the right-of-way of 34th. Haven't received any comments from neighbors or anyone else on it as far as the concerns, and I believe the applicant has a representative here.
The applicant's here if you want to add anything.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Eddie Buell. I work with Buell Consulting on behalf of Verizon Wireless for this tower. As Director Hadley mentioned, this has been previously approved, but it was not constructed. As Verizon takes a look at their priority needs by their radio frequency engineers, this site came up as one of the high priority items. With the development of the city of Dickinson, they really need this tower to provide some offload of an existing tower on the west side of town that's being a little too saturated with the amount of users on it. And so this tower will provide support to that and their surrounding towers and better increased coverage for the residents. Any additional questions, I'm happy to ask as well.
Okay, I think most of us probably remember this when it was before us a couple of years ago. Any questions for the applicant? Any comments?
You did read through the conditions of approval, sir?
Yep. Yep.
And just so the board knows, we did adopt, Stephen worked on adopting some cell tower standards and since that time, so they're a little different than when they came through before, but I think everybody is aware of that.
Okay. This is an application for special use permits, so we will open the meeting for comment from the public. If there's anybody who would like to ask any questions or make any comments about this application, please step forward, state your name, and give us any comments that you might have. Anybody? If not, we will close the public hearing. Anything from commissioners? Any questions or comments? If there are none, we'll look for a motion.
I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission to recommend approval for the application SUP-003-18 for a special use permit for a 119-foot monopole telecommunications tower, subject to the conditions listed above as meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the best interest of the public health, safety, and welfare.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The motion carries. All right, Mr. Hadley, our second item is another special use permit.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another special use permit for a communications tower. It's an existing communications tower at 640 12th Street here, just west of La Quinta and north of Armies in that back parking lot area. It's been there for a number of years. They want to co-locate a number of antennas, but the reason that they're at the meeting today is because they're adding additional equipment on the outside yard area that was not approved previously. Haven't received any comments from any adjoining neighbors or concerns on there, and I believe the applicant has a representative here as well.
Okay, Mr. Hadley, I'm seeing the same number on these SUPs. No, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Okay. But is this a new special use permit, or is this revision of an old?
It's a revision and an addition to the previous approval, whatever that previous approval,
Okay.
contained. They're actually adding more equipment. And what I've asked all the telecommunications folks is if they have a tower they're putting in and they're going to have the ability to possibly co-locate and add 3 or 4 more structures or whatnot on their site, I've asked that they just show that initially, and then that way we don't have to go through this
Okay.
process again, because the special use permits are pretty specific, and we're approving their site plan, we're approving their request as it's presented, and it's really difficult for us to add to that later on.
Okay. Is the applicant present? Okay. Again, special use permits, so we will open this to public comment. Anybody would like to comment, please step forward. Appears there are no comments from the public. Commissioners, anything that you want to know more about, or?
Mr. Hadley, looking through the diagram, it just seems they're adding a transmitter. Am I correct?
I'm sorry, what?
They're adding a transmitter, a Sprint transmitter to
Yes.
basically to the top of the tower.
Yep.
If there's nothing else, we need a motion.
I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval for the application SUP-004-18 for a special use permit for the addition of telecommunications tower equipment on site, subject to the conditions listed above, as meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the best interest of the public health, safety, and welfare.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? If not, we will vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed. The motion carries. And Mr. Hadley, we have a third special use permit application.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This special use permit application is for 15,000 gallons of fuel storage, Lot 5, Block 1, Great Lakes subdivision, Great Lakes First subdivision. The item that this particular lot was included in zone change that was approved by the City Commission last night to industrial. And it's a pretty typical request for this type of lot. It's directly kind of kitty corner and just west of SM Crossing, give you an idea of the location. It's a new home of there's nothing on site currently. It's a new home of a electrical contractor that's going to be constructing there. Have not received any negative comments on there. I did receive a couple of inquiries from folks just asking what was going on in that area. It is an industrial zoned lot, and this definitely is an appropriate use in that category.
Is the applicant here? Do you have anything to add?
Good morning, Chairman Jackson.
Morning.
Commissioners. Morning. Chad Eastos of Eastos Electrical Service. Basically, like Mr. Headley said, the zoning change was just official last night to general industrial, which allows us to apply for a special use permit. Chad has had a contract on this lot for quite some time, hoping for the zoning change and also the special use permit to basically construct a new office, shop, and the fuel storage permit would basically be for his fleet of vehicles he plans to run out of there. Any questions for either of us?
Anybody have any questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks for being here. Mr. Hadley, one question. This is rural fire jurisdiction, I presume.
Yes.
I didn't see comments from rural fire. Did we?
Right, Rural Fire does not comment on applications, but we did send them to the state fire marshal, and the state fire
I saw
marshal
that.
has approved it.
Okay.
We
All right.
We began sending these applications in the ETZ to the state fire marshal's office, and
Okay.
they are very welcoming from the standpoint of they will review and help us out, knowing that the rural folks aren't going to give us a
Okay.
written comment.
Any other comments or questions from commissioners? Okay. Again, we want to hear from the public if there are any comments, so we'll open the floor to any questions or comments from anybody in the public who would like to know more about this application. Anybody, please step forward. If not, we'll close the public hearing. And if there's nothing else from commissioners, we need a motion.
I'll make the motion that move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the petition for the special use permit SUP 005-18 for the site petroleum storage of 15,000 gallons subject to the conditions listed above as meeting all the requirements of the City of Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of the public health, safety, and welfare.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion on this item? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, we've moved item 4 to the bottom, so we'll move on to what's listed as item 5, which is a replat of Prairie Creek Second Subdivision. Mr. Hadley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a replat of Prairie Creek Second Subdivision. What the intent is here, obviously, it's where the Crossings Restaurant is. The intent is to go ahead and, there's obviously streets and whatnot, mostly in that subdivision. They're going to finish it out and build a lower density than what was initially approved for zoning. And I believe the applicant is here to discuss their changes. Engineering has been working with them on utility cap-off and relocations, and we're going to capture that in an amended DA at the end of this.
Let me ask you, we looked at this last month. Are there any changes to the replat since we've looked at it?
Not to the lots. I believe the utilities are working.
I understand that,
Yes,
yeah.
but the lots are
The
the same.
replat itself?
Right.
Okay. The applicant's here. Anything to add by the applicant? Good morning.
Good morning, Phyllis Christensen, Leduc and Associates.
Anything that you want to,
Ma'am,
Tell
no,
us
I've got the list of the 4 extra requirements, and they're in agreement with everything. If there's any questions, I'll try to answer them for you.
okay. Anybody have anything for Ms. Christensen? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything from commissioners on this? We looked at it last month. Sounds like the same. So we'll ask if there's anybody from the public that has any comments, questions.
Yeah, I'm David Smith from 1665 Prairie Creek Road, and this development's right next to us, and we've got I'm against it, so, and I'll let my wife introduce herself and explain why.
I'm Jill Smith, and same address. We're over on, I'll just give you the legal so you're aware of where we are. We're on Lot 5, Block 2 of Prairie Hills 5th Subdivision. There's just been, this has just come to our attention as they were putting the stakes up right to the corner of the back of our lot for a property that's currently being built on. And the way the stakes are now, that they've put them up in the like to the back of the corner of our lot, we would not have access to our backyard. And so clearly this needs to be remedied, unless we're mistaken as to how those stakes are laid out. But my husband did ask the surveyor, and he told us, and if that's true, this, I mean, obviously has to be remedied. I have received permits that were pulled in 2014 where we were allowed 12 feet from the deck to the lot line, which is the very next lot at the edge of your development. And according to the permits in the CO in 2014, this needs to be resolved with us and the developer in writing before any approval by the city on proposed lots is what we're asking. Also, I guess I had a question, was there an easement drainage, for a drainage on, just right on the edge of our property as well? Because when we first moved in there in 2014, we were told that there was one from the city specifically there.
Against all those lots and existing houses.
Between ours and the other lot. And, so, you know, our concerns are that if there is, how are they gonna grade that other lot that's for sale still, or, and just one other thing I wanna just add is that when we moved in there in 2014, improvements have already been made, and there were special requirements, in the permit itself. Special notes and comments, special stipulations, and it was to be, provide landscaping, which was in when we purchased the home. So the way those stakes are, there's a problem.
Deprive us of our landscape.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big problem back there.
Okay, let me ask you this. First of all, this replat is not changing anything from what existed when you bought your home. It's not, as far as streets and access and all that, nothing is changing in the replat. But can you tell me your lot and block number?
Yes.
It's this one right here, Gene. It's this one right here.
Oh, okay.
Lot 5, Block 2, Prairie Hills 5th Subdivision. And the way they have it staked out, it looks like they're cutting across our yard so much that we will not have access to our backyard.
Be this one up here.
Yeah, yep. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, that's what I meant, I'm sorry.
So basically, we're asking that those stakes either be, you know, reconsidered, the way it's being surveyed in the back.
Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Mr. Chairman, if I will, I'd really need to go out and look at the stakes. I don't, you know, this has just come to my attention now. I hadn't heard anything. But like Chairman Jackson had mentioned, this replat isn't changing the boundaries of what the Prairie Creek Edition has platted initially. It's just reconfiguring some of the lots internal to it. So
I think you need
But
to
they
come out and
staked
look
it so
at
that it would be changing our lot.
And
They
basically,
staked it that way.
Okay.
That other lot comes up under our yard.
I mean, so far that we will not have access. They're taking that whole 12 feet off.
do you have an idea what the stake was for, a property?
You
What
asked the
mistake?
surveyor, why don't you talk to
Yeah,
him?
I asked a survey, and basically, you have to come out there and see it. Well,
If there's a, okay, at that, there's a angle, and then now if it's this other stake, we're okay, it's close, but we're okay. But when he asked the surveyor, it was the stake at the further from the Prairie Creek Road, and that would cut right into, across, right up to our deck. We'd have no access then.
Maybe the surveyor might be here today. I don't know if Mr. Wood might be able to comment on it. I have a hard time commenting on it without seeing the stake.
Right, but that's why we want this not to go forward until we get this resolved.
There, go to the sidewalk, that's.
There's a blo-
The CEO says it's got 12 feet, going off from that deck right there is 12 feet.
Put this,
Yeah, so basically, so basically this is what's going down the side. Right now, the land goes right, that's this stake right here,
mhm.
this stake right here, so right against our deck right there.
I think the property line.
Yeah, that's that lot, but that whole lot gets this whole chunk to it. You can't get to our backyard, because that goes over, basically the city put a permit in there. That is truly the line, it's right against the property line. So I don't, basically
Okay.
want to be able to resolve it so that
In writing.
some way.
Yeah, I think it's something that's gonna require the surveyors to go out and take a look at this.
Well, I think what we're proposing is that the developer resurvey, not our lot be resurveyed, because our lot was in 2014, we received a CO, we received landscaping, everything should be okay with our lot.
Understand, Mrs. Smith, that, yeah, this plat should and cannot in any way affect the land
Okay.
that you have.
Okay, that's
So-
our concern, of course.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we like the development out there. We don't have any other problems with it, but yeah,
Until that gets resolved.
yeah. But we would like something in writing that was gonna make sure that we are free and clear on our property, that nothing will ever, I mean, right now, the way it's staked, it doesn't look that way, so, and
Okay.
it causes us, a lot of concern.
It's a little hard to explain here today, but really what you're describing is possibly a survey dispute, and it really has nothing to do with the replat.
But you can't get to our backyard, I mean, if that.
I understand
property
that.
owner technically wants that land, you can't get to our backyard.
But who's surveying it? It's the developer, correct? It's not the city.
And the city gave us a CO,
So-
basically, that there's 12 feet to the property line.
So the
somebody goofed
dispute
up
is between
somewhere.
the city and the developer then, in my opinion, but we're caught in the middle. But what was issued by the city is not being honored by the developer at this point. That needs to be resolved.
Something needs to be resolved.
Yes, it does. Yeah, it sounds like it.
And
I think
I
it-
would rather have that line tied up until it is resolved.
If I could add, and I think what Chairman Jackson was saying was, there was a survey done when it was done initially, and when your lot
It
was
just was
created.
done like they just put the stakes up about a week or so
When
ago.
they graded that, they never, if they had come into our yard like that, I mean, if they had followed the property, if that truly is a property line, we probably would have never bought the place, because that would have taken, I'm getting at, you
Right.
had to grade
No,
that all up.
I understand. It's
He's
just that
asking when the stakes were put up. and
We're
that
just
was
saying initially, the stakes were put in the ground when this was approved the first time around.
No,
And
they just came in
They
about
just
a week
came in.
ago. That's why we just,
Noticed it now.
yeah,
I
this
mean,
just came up.
We thought it was to that back corner that I was showing you earlier, not the one over there.
But your property pin property pin will be there.
What's that?
Your property pin should be there from when they surveyed your lot
No,
originally.
I know that, but what I'm getting at is they,
The new lot going next to us, they've
Yeah.
resurveyed, see those
Who
lots
looks
out
at-
there, now they're putting
it
the
was all-
stakes
It was all
out.
landscaped when we moved in there, so more than likely the previous owner landscaped over into a lot that probably wasn't his.
No. You
I don't
let's just
know.
Let me talk. Okay, so all the other survey stakes were put up except right along Prairie Creek Road on that one, I think there's 5 or 6 lots, is there? Something like that? Just those ones right from to the north, of our property. And those are the only ones that have not been staked yet. And I think they're waiting on approval, probably from this meeting possibly. But they did stake the back of it already, so that
Right,
is
figured
where
it
our,
out.
our flags went up, of course, because now they're starting to stake it, and that's when we saw the problem.
Understand. Those 6 lots that you're referring to that are, again, along Prairie Creek Road, north of your lot, are not a part of this replat. Those were a part of the initial, what we call Prairie Creek First Edition, that was platted in a few years ago.
Yeah,
I
but
guess
it's a snack-
2014
But now
or
they're
15.
developing,
It's
correct?
this next,
And now it's being built out. I'm assuming that's why the
Correct.
stakes are there, that a home is
Correct.
looking to be built.
Yeah,
it's the next plotting that will cause the issues.
yeah. And whenever that comes up, I guess we're maybe not knowledgeable about when those are coming up before you guys, but I thought they were coming up at this meeting, possibly not. But irregardless, it needs to be resolved, you know, as soon as possible for, you know, for the development to go through and everything to,
So this isn't the lots next to us, this one here?
They're not part of this addition.
Okay.
The lots next to you are not part.
but, okay,
So
so
it'd be the lots kind of north. I'll just
we
put-
got the notice, so we came, I mean, from
Sure.
the city, so we didn't know
It's
exactly what.
everybody within 300 feet.
Yeah,
That's a no.
just close. That's where, we're right on the edge of it,
This is-
so.
Okay. All right. And I don't have a problem, I have a problem.
Gotcha.
But, if somebody would wanna meet us out there, I'm there usually during the day, so I can, meet with somebody too out there to show you what we're talking about.
I think that, Mr. Chairman, if I might, have the developers, surveyor and possibly a representative from city engineering, if they can go, maybe they could look at it and see what's going on there. I don't know, Jeremy, do you have anything else you can add or you want to add to it?
Yeah. As far as a surveyor on record, Northern Plains Engineering is a surveyor on record. And I think I know what may be going on. Apologize, I have a cold today, but.
Could you, just for the record, state your name?
Sure. Jeremy Wood, Northern Plains Engineering. I think the lot that is in question is what, lot 5 is where you guys reside, correct? And I think what's going on is, could I ask, are you guys the original homeowners?
Well,
Oh, no, we bought it.
2014,
It-
we're the original ones that closed on it. It's just
Yeah,
that
and
This is our,
And I think, we'll certainly verify everything, but I think really what may be going on,
it's the two stakes.
yeah, and I think maybe what's going on is the previous owner landscaped into essentially this new subdivision.
However, it was stipulated that landscaping had to be done before the city's final approval and the CO was issued, which was issued. So that would put the blame on the city then, because it was issued for free and clear, landscape and all was there when we got the CO, so.
Who would be doing the landscaping?
I don't
My
know.
client,
I don't know, but here's
or-
all the permits. It was a special stipulation, it said provide landscaping, which had to been done before the CO was issued. This
Mr.
is a
Chairman?
copy of all our
And
permits.
it had 12 feet.
If,
Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd excuse me, I'll just step away. We'll set up a meeting. I don't think it's really pertinent to the plat at hand for this board. If we could just step away for a minute, we'll set up a meeting. We can go out and look at this, I think, resolve it.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
Kulis.
Thanks.
we'll certainly get this resolved or try to get resolved. We don't want this to impede the plat. I think it's a separate issue, actually, but.
It is. It is. Okay, thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Anybody else from the public have any comments on this replat? Anybody else? If not, we'll close the public hearing. Any more questions from commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add in, they are amending their existing development agreement to include the lighting that is now forthcoming and the utility relocations that they're working with Mr. Kubis on. And really, those are the only issues that we have that they have to resolve.
Anything else? If not, we need a motion.
I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of FLP-001-18, final plot for the replat of Prairie Creek subdivision as depicted in attachment A, as meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of the public health, safety, and welfare.
We have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. The motion carries. All right, we're going to move to what is shown as item 6 on the agenda, which is a replat of the Lyons 4th subdivision. Mr. Hadley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another replat of Lyons. which would create Lions Forest subdivision. Basically, the area along, if you're familiar with the Lions subdivision, the area that when you access the subdivision, it would be on your south side of Lions Road, and on the west side as you're heading in between the road and the existing apartments to the west. That was all one lot, and it was included in PUD. It was actually included for R2 type development, and what the applicant is doing is wanting to go ahead and replat those into single-family lots and start building single-family homes in that area. There's a couple of issues for stormwater, and they are going to be installing street lights. We're going to amend the existing DA that's on record. Very similar to the last project in that it's kind of a revision of what was initially approved in a lesser density. As staff hasn't received any comments except for neighbors to the east that had a concern that we were going to continue the fence that was constructed between them and the subdivision for garbage containment. And that's reflected in the conditions of approval. Other than that, there's access. We're having a debate whether or not 17th on the east side of this subdivision would ever go through. We're currently keeping a half of that roadway or the right-of-way. So potentially, if the development would happen to the east of this site, that we could actually acquire the other half of that right-of-way and have that road go through. But right now, at this point, we really don't want to promote its use based on the residents to the east. With that, I believe the applicant has a representative here as well, and they can probably explain that.
Anything to add? Morning, Mr. Soren.
Good morning, Sean Soren, Boundary Engineering. I don't have much further to add other than to point out there are no intended changes to the PUD, and part of that PUD does require that fence that Mr. Hadley had referred to. The developer is planning to put a similar fence between these lots and the apartment complex that is there as these houses go up on these lots as well. Other than that, I believe we've worked through all the issues with the city staff and are looking forward to move forward.
Anything for Mr. Soren?
Mr. Soren, you have the conditions in the staff review, that you're comfortable with all those? Yeah, the applicant is.
Yeah, I believe we're comfortable with those. I think we've addressed the majority of those through that development agreement that we're working on as well. And the street lighting, as soon as we get approval, he's got contractors he's been working with to get that started as soon as possible here. So the intent would to have them completed by August, provided that everything moves forward.
Mr. Chairman, I do see on the recommendations, obviously there's a typo. It just says preliminary. It should say preliminary final plat. So this is a final plat on the last page as a review.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Soren. Anything else? Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment on this replat of the Lions subdivision? Any comments, any questions? Okay, we'll close the public portion of this meeting and or this item and look for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of FLP 004-18 final plat for the replat of lines 2nd and 3rd to create Lions Forest subdivision as depicted in the attachment A as meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. That motion carries. All right, we will move to what is shown as item 4 on the agenda. Mr. Hadley?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, this memo was dated May 9th on the final plat for Odyssey Theater, which is directly south of City Hall here. The applicant did come to City Hall yesterday early, and we had a number of issues, obviously, that needed to be resolved before this item could move forward. And obviously, last Wednesday, when the packets went out, those items weren't resolved. So that's why you have that memo in your hand to table this item. Now, since then, Engineer Kubis and I and Fire Marshal Selly met with the applicant and have resolved in concept all of the items that were outstanding. Now, those are going to be captured in a development agreement. They have submitted a development agreement. They have paid their fees. They've done a number of the things that were on the outstanding list that staff couldn't support moving it forward. At this point, I would like to kind of turn it over to them to kind of give them this project, as I think most of the commission knows, has been in the works for probably a year and a half-ish, somewhere around there or more. City Administrator Kessel was working with the Odyssey Theater folks first, and basically, where we are is, I think that everybody wants to see the project move forward. Staff would support that, and I think that Engineer Kubis and I can work on the development agreement and refine it to the point where it works for all of us and the city as well. With that, I think that the applicant is here. I'd like to maybe have them explain their own proposal as far as what they brought from May 9th to date.
Okay.
Good morning, I'm Troy Tews with Light Teller Johnson.
And I'm Brian Sieve with Odyssey Entertainment.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As Mr. Hadley mentioned, we met with him and Mr. Kubis and Mr. Selly yesterday and addressed a number of issues that he had in his last review. We'll just give a quick overview of them. First one we talked about was handicap parking and the parking lot layout in general. And we agree that we will reconfigure the parking lot, handicap spacing, and reverse the flow direction, what we previously showed, to accommodate the drive-through for the post office. We talked about the developers agreement at length, and Walter is gonna provide us with some revisions to that developers agreement. And we don't have any problems with anything we talked about yesterday, or the developers agreement revisions. Life safety travel distances were talked about within the building with the fire marshal. We know that parking is a sensitive issue downtown, and during construction, we know we're gonna have to have detailed phasing plans of how we're gonna handle pedestrian and parking throughout construction of the theater, and we're willing to do that. We know that, people's parking spots are important to them, and we'll try to minimize impact to the public as we build the building. We know that there's certain activities that go on downtown. Municipal Court Day on Thursdays. We'll try to address as many of those issues as we can in those phasing plans, and make sure that our contractor is fully aware of the issues that have been presented by city staff. We talked about landscaping, and we're familiar with some changes that are happening in Dickinson, particularly along the corridor of Sims. And we talked about emulating what's happening there. We know that we have a 0 lot line building. We don't have a lot of room for landscaping. But we're gonna do the best we can to make it an attractive building, and we think that it's gonna be a great thing for downtown. Those are the majority of the things we talked about yesterday. We're here to answer any questions or any further questions you may have.
Okay, let me first ask staff if Mr. Tew's summary fits with what your understanding of what needs to happen out there.
Yes, yeah, we need to look at,
You're in sync?
it's all the same items, the streetscape, the finished product. I mean, this project is not the typical final plat, but the final plat is the footprint of the building. So we have all these other issues that
Sure.
that we almost can't ignore, because if we did, we would have had issues at the time of the building permit when they were actually ready to build. So
Okay.
we have all these issues that we've been working through, and I think his summary was a pretty good summary of what we went through.
So no exceptions taken to anything Mr.
No.
Tew's is, okay. Anybody on the commission have any questions or comments?
I have a comment, Mr. Chairman. Let's get this thing done.
Well, that's,
People are excited. They've been waiting forever.
and that's part of the, Brian Seaves speaking here, but that's part of the challenge here is, you know, we don't have a tremendously long construction season, and this is a more difficult build, especially with the challenges of, you know, building on a compact space, and the building is tall. It's over 30 feet tall. So anytime you're dealing with construction of those heights, and we really, it's very difficult to do it in the winter time. So, you know, if we can get it, you know, timed to the summer, that makes all the difference in the world to us. And again, I think there's, you know, to Mr. Hadley's point, you know, there's a lot of little details that were, I think, caught up, not that anybody was ignoring them, but just, you know, in a typical development process, when you replat, you don't have to deal with these details, but when you get into 0 lot line issues, they all have to come forward fairly quick that we typically address in a building plan review. Well, they got pulled forward here, and so that's, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to sit down with staff yesterday and have a very productive meeting. I think we worked through the issues. We see eye to eye on just about everything we talked or found a resolution for. So, you know, our plan, Commissioner, is to have our building plans. I think we're pretty advanced.
85% right now. Our plan is to have the building plans themselves completed by the end of May, and have them submitted to city staff for building permit review by June 1st. And we're gonna run the bid process concurrently with that, and our hopes are to get in the ground this summer as soon as we can.
No one told you that we have 3 seasons here: winter, summer, fall. There's no spring.
Okay, and for the record, we need to make it clear that our action today concerns only the plat. We understand that the development agreement brings in some overlap, but you will still have site plan approval, building permit approval, and
We understand.
the rest of it. Any more questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chairman, just if I could, our sequence, they're gonna apply by June 1st, which is fine for the building permit. June 5th, this would go to the city commission for the final plat approval, so then this would be finalized
Okay.
at that point. So we would be complete with our part, which hopefully the building department then would have a few days of looking at your application before you get it, and, you know, if it works out right, then building permit could be issued soon after that 5th meeting.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Good luck
Thank
in
you.
the project.
It'll be quite visible for all you folks.
Good.
It's on the front
Good.
door, so.
All right, we're going to ask if anybody from the public has any comments on this replat, or replat, I guess it is, right?
Replat.
Anybody from the public, any questions or comments, please step forward. There are apparently none, so we will close the public hearing. Ask if there's anything else from the commission. And if there is not, we need a motion.
Not a formal motion in here, so I'll just, Dickinson Planning is, I make a motion that we approve the final plat for FLP 005-18 for Odyssey First Edition.
All right, we have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. Any more discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Motion carries. All right, that is the extent of our action agenda for the day. We have a couple of work session items. And the first, Ms. Murtha, I think, is going to begin the discussion.
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to pass out 3 items for each of you for the purposes of this discussion. One of them is the outline of a draft ordinance, and the other 2 are ordinances. One is the current Morton County ordinance, and one is was the proposed Stark County ordinance that did not pass. It's my understanding. Okay. Thank you. The other ordinances are being provided for discussion purposes because I wanted this body to see what other jurisdictions have been doing, because there are, well, there's not a whole lot that political subdivisions are able to regulate with regards to this, because the regulation space has been so occupied by the Department of Health. But there are a couple things that are within your discretion that you will need to decide upon. So the first document would be an ordinance draft, and the very first thing that I'll note is that what the intent of this ordinance would accomplish is providing for a special use permit process for both a medical marijuana manufacturing facility and a medical marijuana dispensary. There is not going, I would recommend not having a lengthy definition section in this ordinance for the very simple reason of there is a very lengthy definition section in state law with regards to these items, and how marijuana is defined, how a facility and dispensary are defined, and what constitutes usable marijuana, who may purchase it, are all heavily defined in state code. So then if you duplicate that in your own and state code changes, or the rules and the definitions associated with the interpretation of those definitions change, then you then are in the process of constantly updating your code to reflect those changes. And essentially this is different than many of the, well, pretty much any other type of business that you would be providing a special use permit for, because absent this state law, it is illegal, so it can't be done. So it really is entirely dependent upon the legitimacy of the activity as provided by the state. And so the reason, or you'll note there are 2 definitions just to basically say what you're covering, the dispensary and the manufacturing facility. However, everything else relates back to that chapter in the Century Code, which will provide the definitions and interpretation. You'll notice that in the 2 other ordinances before you, Morton County did not include definitions. They're referring back to state code. Stark County did, again in their draft, include some lengthy definitions that mirror and match up with the state code. And my personal opinion is I view that as duplicative and unnecessary, and potentially you can run into conflict if the state law changes or the interpretation changes and you don't update your code in a timely manner. The next item that you'll need to decide on is where are you going to allow these facilities? So what districts, what zoning districts? So for discussion purposes only, not as a recommendation, I included in for manufacturing, agricultural, and general industrial, and for the dispensary, general industrial, and general commercial, just to start the discussion for you. However, this is a policy decision. So it is for you to decide. There are additional setback requirements within any of those zones that you'll need to decide upon, but I would start the discussion there. And I will let you know that while we have not, just kind of a backtrack for any of you who attended the presentation provided by the Department of Health at a City Commission meeting not too long ago. They had indicated that towards the end of the rulemaking process, they decided to incorporate a form as far as as part of the application process for those entities seeking permits from the state. And this form was to be signed off on by the local zoning official when the individual applied for the permit process. And the zoning official would have to state whether or not, if they were granted, if they would be eligible to have the location of their business where they're saying that they wanted it. Because what they didn't want to have happen from the state's perspective was to grant the permit, but then locally it doesn't fit, and so now they've granted it to somebody who cannot operate at the location that they had approved through the state process. So it is a kind of pre-approval. It's not the expectation of the state that applicants come before you and get a special use permit first, but that you say if they were to, they would most likely get it. Given that the application period for dispensaries has opened, we did not receive one. We did not receive any contact from any individuals seeking to set up a manufacturing facility. We have, however, been contacted by a business who would like to seek a dispensary permit from the state and has provided the form indicating the desirable address that they're looking at. I'll just, for information purposes for the discussion, that address is located in a general commercial district. So that's one before you right now. You don't have that form yet because you haven't decided on setback requirements. And my comments to the person or the business contacting about this was that this draft ordinance was coming before this body today. Based upon guidance, we would be able to not say on the form that they would or would not, but whether it would be likely or unlikely. And the state is aware of the position that they've put political subdivisions in by not saying that they were going to ask for this form until the end of the rulemaking process, until basically March, so they know that a lot of places won't have their ordinances up and ready to go.
Can I interrupt you, Ms.
Yes,
Smith?
absolutely.
There may be some naivety in my question here, but why are we pushing this to general commercial?
You're not, you're not pushing. It's something you have to decide as a policy matter. Where do you want these type of businesses located? For informational purposes only, I'm just letting you know that someone has asked, have inquired about, and is looking at a space in general commercial. It is not appropriate, I think, to draft an ordinance based on somebody's inquiry, but I wanted you to be aware that there would likely be inquiries for that zoning district. So it's for you to decide, where do you want these? I can say, in looking at Morton counties, where they placed it, I believe it was industrial and
Manufacturing might be one thing, but dispensing, I find myself wondering, we're pushing it out into a heavy commercial as opposed to an area that there might be businesses with regular foot traffic and whatnot. I wonder if that puts a different, casts a different light on the business. You know, are we presuming nefarious activity that we want it in some heavy commercial area? Or do we want to see it as a positive thing?
We had this discussion on Stark County planning. And my comments at the time were, I've been to Colorado and I see where their dispensaries are and where they're located. I don't think that other states, to include Colorado, are putting places, dispensaries like in general commercial, with the fear that there's gang activity or anything nefarious going on, as you would say. I would like to see the data provided, you know, at least to this commission, if there is such an activity going on. I know the comment came up because at Stark County Planning is they wanted a certain amount of setback. Basically, an isolation, the building, from what I read, the building would be isolated, well lit and video monitoring, but to prohibit that type of activity if there was some kind of criminal activity around it. And I would say I'd like to see the data provided to either planning and zoning that there is such activity happening around these. You think you would hear it if it is.
I don't know what our state law is compared
Right.
to Colorado's. I've seen Colorado's too.
Right.
But I just wonder if this is between a dentist's office and a abstractor, if it isn't a better thing. I don't know.
I don't think we should push it out into industrial, and that's the only place it can go.
Isn't there a state ruling, like page 85 here, what it says, permitted districts, the compassion center growing processing is permitted by special use permit only in the agricultural and industrial
But
district.
that's for manufacturing.
Okay, so that wouldn't pertain to us.
It is for you to decide
Okay.
where these are appropriately placed.
If I
When
could-
I asked the question, I said maybe there's some naivety in my question. I don't know. I've never had it dispensed to me.
I think it very much is a policy decision about how you want to view these activities. So if it's a dispensary, but it's only allowed in agricultural, that means it's going to be out.
See, and that doesn't feel right to me. If we're going to do this, why don't we look at it positively and have the amount of enforcement that it needs and make it a legitimate thing in our community.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add to the zoning discussions, the grow operations, we were thinking of putting in industrial and ag. We have had some inquiries. Miss Murtha hasn't, but we have had some. Don't know that they were serious because they haven't called lately, but for the area. Little different. That can be absorbed in other areas. We haven't heard from the Downtown Association on how they fed into whether or not they feel it's appropriate to be in the downtown. They were asked, and so we're kind of waiting on that response. We would like to gear this to, if this ever does go to the next step, that we actually are ready and we have it in appropriate areas that we want it. Not just for its use currently, but the future too. We probably should plan that at some point in time this probably will be.
But if we're
Somewhat
requiring a
Colorado.
special use permit, and that's the way I'm reading it,
Right.
we'd be requiring a special, then we really have pretty much real-time control over something that's going the wrong way, correct?
You do. It's just a matter of giving guidance to those looking at the operations of where are the possibilities for them to locate this business.
If this happened to be in a strip mall on State Avenue, State Street, in broad daylight, with other good businesses as neighbors, I think that's a better thing.
Well, it has to be run like a pharmacy, doesn't it?
No.
I mean,
No, they do.
No.
They don't. You will not be receiving prescriptions.
Oh, really?
No. You have a compassionate care medical marijuana card, and even the doctors do not provide prescriptions. They provide a recommendation so that the person can get this card. But I agree with Eugene. I think we can't ostracize that and just set them apart. I think it needs to be part that it fits into the structure of our community if it's truly a compassionate care dispensary. So as long as it, by the setbacks, by state setbacks, if it's 1,200 feet from a school, I don't know if states would fit that because of the high school right there, the strip mall right there, but it might at the end of states there.
Consideration, sure.
Yeah, it could be where the old pita pit is, and that would.
Right or wrong,
Right.
I do not know the detail of the
Right.
state law that was passed.
But I
support we
agree
should-
with you, it should be able to be in a facility like that and not set alone by itself and isolated. Then I think you do kind of.
Invite certain behavior.
Right, I would agree.
And I'd agree too, but on the general commercial, we do have new, let's say, pharmacies that are built in general commercial as well. So just to add that. So maybe we want to expand that list if we, get the input from the downtown folks, and then maybe if it's community commercial or whatever, that's usually what you're referring to as far as the strip mall type things. Under 2B, the way it was written, I think Ms. Murtha put GI and GC. We probably would, the intent initially was to put LI as well under that, just because, and it just starts the discussion, but, obviously we wouldn't exclude that. But I will continue to get the downtown association's comment on the downtown district. I don't know, if you guys have a feeling on that you want me to pass on to them, or?
My preference would be to be available in, any commercial zoning. I mean, if it's CC or light commercial. I'd rather have it out in the open, where people have eyes on it all the time than us jamming in the back of a building somewhere out in the industrial park. I mean, obviously, we're not gonna grow in town, probably. That facility would have to be something different, but.
I honestly feel like I'm a little light on education.
I agree with
in the
that,
whole
too.
matter.
I think everybody is.
To understand really what this business is going to be.
And to be fair, you're not alone. I think the vast majority of the state is going through that, and absent going to different states and seeing how various facilities are run, it's hard to get a sense of what that will look like for this community.
I know this would be extreme, and I'm not suggesting this, but I'd almost say limit it to community commercial. Really try to make it something that's, and I'm not ready to say that, but.
Well, there are some people that really need this medical marijuana. They have a certain illness and it was passed by the state, so I guess we have to do is make a decision of where to put it if it happens.
In Colorado, they seem to be jammed between tattoo shops and
And pizza joints?
I think, they're all along in the downtown area of Colorado. It's interspersed with shopping, not just the food and beverage facilities, but it is clothing stores and the like.
I saw that likewise when I was down there. You just walking down Main Street, and there's a dispensary beside a boutique, and on the other side there might be a donut shop or whatever. It's just on their main streets. And now I know some counties, and this is just from my personal experience out on the western side of Colorado, some counties did set off their their dispensaries, they did isolate them. And you can see them when you're driving down the road. They're just sitting out in the open. They're very isolated. And to me, it just, I don't think that's what we want.
Backing out to the big
Right.
picture here, what's our goal today? You're introducing this
For
for
guidance,
future consideration. Should we be taking this home and doing a little reading?
I mean, please do, and then if you have any comments, the idea would be to, knowing the, well, it's not a rush to get it on in the code right away necessarily. It is a bit of a rush to be able to give guidance to those individuals who might be seeking permits. And again, I believe the state is comfortable with us saying it's likely or unlikely. We don't have an ordinance yet, but we still have to have enough of a concept to be able to, say it's likely or unlikely.
So that somebody can receive at least approval.
To
or
participate in the-
participate the dispensary.
Yes.
Where's the state at with it? When are they?
They've opened the, they did already open the manufacturing, and I think that might have already been closed.
It's closed.
And then they have opened the dispensary permitting process now.
You're talking about the rulemaking?
No, I'm talking about the
Application.
RFP to get the
Oh,
permit from the.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
There's gonna be two growing facilities in the state, and I can't remember how many
8.
people.
There's 8.
No, there's 2 growing facilities, and then there's 8 site selections, and basically they circled areas where the dispensaries, what we're talking about right here, the dispensaries, and more than likely, I would say from what the state has indicated, they would like these dispensaries to be in a major city. If you look at their areas of selection, they have one in Fargo, one in Grand Forks, Devil's Lake, us, Williston. So, and then it encompasses about 125 mile radius.
I presume there'd be no limitations on things like the periodic fire inspections?
No.
Well, actually, and I'm sorry to jump in on that. It is a little bit interesting the way they did their administrative rules, that if a local enforcement authority, be it police or fire, want to get access to any part of the facility where marijuana is maintained, then a representative from that part of the DOH needs to be with them. So there has to be this constant coordination with the states, even for inspection purposes, unless there's exigent circumstances, there's an emergency, you gotta get in there. So that, it is a very heavily regulated program, which is why it sort of limits what the locality can do. We'd actually initially talked about perhaps having a license go along with this, but the way the state structure set it up, they encompass the space so much of what you would do with licensing authority that they're essentially asking political subdivisions just focus on the special use permitting process.
Okay.
That's-
Okay. We have other things to do this morning.
Wait, but we're not done yet.
Okay.
The really important stuff, if I may.
Okay.
So, going on to what's under additional requirements, and this is really where you get into the focus of your special use permit, which is one thing just to clarify, the only setback requirement in state law is the 1,000 feet from a school. How they define school is very loose. They recommend, if you want to be as conservative as possible, that you public, private, daycare, preschool, all of those have a setback, but it's 1,000 from that. So Stark County, for example, added an extra 250 feet on their recommendation. However, knowing that there is no setback in there from libraries, from public parks, from churches, from residences. So if that's something you want to add, it's something you would need to add here. And I think that's going to be an important point for example, the property that the person had been inquiring about just recently, it's away from schools, but it is close to a residence. It would not be 1,000 feet back from a residence. So just knowing that would be an additional requirement that you would have to decide where you're coming down on.
I know that the discussion in Stark County Planning was to not, this was presented to us, and I don't know if this has changed since then, Mr. Josephson, I don't think it has, but this was presented to us, and I would say the general consensus of that board was not to be any more onerous than what the state requirement is, because they just felt that the state requirement was good enough. Even though these were some of the suggestions, there were some added categories, but I don't know if their minds have changed since then, Mr. Josephson, but I know that was the discussion, is not to be any more than what the state requirements were.
Steve Josephson, County Plan, we'll be bringing something back to
Right.
the, to planning and zoning. I think we did have a discussion with the, with the sheriff a couple weeks ago. I think in terms of the restrictions we were proposing for the dispensary, those are gonna go by the wayside. The issue then is, if this is a manufacturing facility, there are certain standards in the code about treating manufacturing facilities in terms of setbacks from residences that are more restrictive than what's in the state code. So that's the direction that we're heading in right now. But there'll be a draft available at the next P&Z County Planning and Zoning Board meeting, which is it's at the end of this month.
And I think I can take that guidance and then craft something. One thing I would highly recommend doing is there is some wonderful language that was in both Stark County and in the Morton County with regards to odor and maintaining an air filtration system that controls that odor. And will just tell you from my work as a prosecutor and time spent around the drug task forces, there's an odor, and so it would be a good idea to have. I would just make a recommendation. It would be a good idea to have something with regards to that odor control in your special use permitting process.
Okay.
If I can maybe suggest, I think Attorney Murtha's guidance is, and direction she's kind of guiding us to move is next month that we'd have an ordinance that maybe has an all-encompassing list of zoning districts, and we can always amend that and send a recommendation forward based on that. It doesn't sound like we're going to add any new guidelines or more stringent guidelines from the discussion that we're having, and then that way we can actually move it forward, and the city commission then could hear it and have this probably try to be finalized in July, which is I think what our goal was. Is that right?
It is.
Yes, yeah. So if you're comfortable with that, maybe what we'll do is massage the zones a little bit. I will work on the downtown association, at least get their input. And if we feel it's appropriate, maybe we'll just include it, but we'll at least get their input on how they feel about it.
I'm just trying to think if there are other things we can ask for that invite more investment by an owner, more little higher level of management by an owner. I don't know what those things would be. In other words, to encourage Main Street businesses, a Main Street business. And I don't have examples, but.
And maybe, it may be that there's certain security parameters that we insert. Video.
I'm even thinking about the storefront.
Oh, okay.
Maybe
facade,
what it looks like. Something that demands a little more investment. Not only financial, but
Mr. Chairman, I think we would be able to pull that off with our downtown standards and then also our overlay. If they're in those corridors, then obviously they're going to have
I suppose we have to be careful targeting a certain business,
I'm not sure what you're thinking.
I don't know what I'm thinking either. I'm just trying to,
mean, I don't think they're gonna display like marijuana cigarettes in the front window, so
Well,
I'm
that-
not really sure what.
That's one thing that,
I mean, they just
I-
look like they're, I mean, you go to the ones, you look at, see the ones in Colorado, they're just a storefront. I mean,
Yeah.
the dispensary part's behind a wall in the back, you know.
I guess what I've seen down there is most of them, they're not see-through glass. You can't see through the front glass of the facility inside. It seems they have that whited glass.
You can
Um,
see some people waiting usually, but
Yeah.
you don't see any of them buying or.
And if
I don't have a
Commissioner-
specific. I'm
Yeah.
just
If I may,
brainstorming.
Commissioners, and I think Attorney Murtha knows this too, if you read the state law, there are some very stringent, there are some very stringent, you know, there are even
Security.
design requirements in terms of advertising in front of both at the distribution centers and the manufacturing centers. So you can't have something like with a big arrow saying, get your medical marijuana here. It's very matter of fact. They even go into things like controlling the name of the products. So there's a lot of this that's covered in the state legislation that you know, that they have to follow. It's outside of local government parameters. It's
Okay.
interesting the way they wrote this.
Do you have enough, Ms. Martha, to?
Yeah, I do. I will update the draft and bring it back for potentially final approval at the next meeting.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Mr. Kupas.
Thank you, Chairman Jackson. Just a kind of a report for an upcoming work session that we'd like to have. We've had some discussion with a gentleman by the name of Steve Sletner with KLJ. I had the opportunity to meet with him a couple weeks ago. He'd met with other staff members earlier. And what he's proposing to do would be to have a joint meeting of this body and the City Commission at our next upcoming planning and zoning meeting to go over really three things. There's some planning principles. In my discussion with Mr. Sletner, he has a long background of planning, of laying out subdivisions across the, look to me to be the upper Midwest. He's an engineer, so he's a very good planner, I think. But and then he also wanted to talk about getting more out of your code. We've had from time to time discussions. You know, one thing that I recall vividly was a discussion when Barron's Vista came to this board several years ago, and we talked about street lengths, maximum street lengths. And so I think Steve Sletner has some really good insight in his experience and his background on things like that, you know, and maybe areas of our code that don't specifically address things. He's got some good insight on that. And the third item that he wanted to visit with about was key components of our comp plan. The comp plan is 5 years old now, approximately. A lot of that comp plan was done more than 5 years ago, put together in a different economy for sure. And just, you know, so how we can take what we envisioned and we said that these were the things we wanted Dickinson to do through planning, and maybe how to tweak those visions in a different environment that we have today. So I assume this meeting would be about an hour long or so, depending on the questions and the engagement that we have through the two boards present. But just wanted to give you that heads up that it is something that we're planning, unless there's absolutely no interest in doing so. That Steve with KLJ and others from KLJ would be out to present, probably 2 or 3 folks. So.
And we're talking about next month?
Yeah, at the June 20th.
Mhm. So I presume if we were to do this, we'd probably eliminate other work session items as much as possible and.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
June 19th, that's what it says on here, sir.
Is it the 19th?
Then it's wrong on here.
Third Wednesday. So.
Should be the 20th.
I think it'd be good, you know, most of us don't have technical training in this stuff, and it'd be a good review. comprehensive plan was very, was a very active process when it happened, I know. And a lot of us weren't involved, so. Mhm. Everybody good with that? I assume appropriate staff would be here too,
Correct.
to hear this. Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Hadley, we talked about permitting.
Building permits, yes. I did ask the building department, and I think Jim ran and got something. So I think he's gonna give us an update on number of building permits, and then we will ask the building department graciously to maybe give us an update in spring and fall of every year, maybe.
No.
Just-
No. Chairman, Commission, sorry about that, it's kind of informal, but I went down to the IT guy, he got me some information. We have 23 new, bad timing, 23 new permits, 1 commercial, 22 residential as of the 1st of January, and 37 alterations, which are 13 are commercial and 24 are residential. And on the 22 new residential ones, those consist of, those are just single family and single family attached.
So 22 since the 1st of January?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, especially this active time of year, I would like to see maybe even monthly, just, I know that you used to do a report for city commission. I don't know if you're still doing that, but I'd like to see
We can
these
do it.
numbers. It just gives us a feel for what's
Sure.
going on, if we can do that.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Jim.
you bet.
Anything else from commissioners for this meeting? Anybody from the public? There's no public here. Motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
We are adjourned, and with that, we will open the meeting of the Urban Forestry Committee. I think the last time we tried to do this, we didn't have a quorum, as I recall, and I wonder if we do today. I don't think we probably do we? A quorum for the Urban Forestry Committee?
We have 5 here, 5 out of 10. That would be it. Yes, 10 committee members. I would say that does not qualify.
I think there are more than 10, aren't there?
Mr. Chairman, we will need to revisit. We just hired a,
You know, I think that as staff, you guys need to take a look at how we're structured. You know, the members who are not P and Z members aren't attending very well, and
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
Why don't we just make it the P and Z?
we need to do something different.
I mean,
You take no action if you don't have a quorum, but.
Yeah.
that's a recommendation anyway.
well, as you remember, we combined these
Yes.
for that very reason.
I understand,
And
but I
then-
think maybe we need to go further.
Yeah, and we have just made an offer to a new forester,
Mhm.
and that person actually has some background in running a urban forestry committee. Maybe in the interim, before he gets, I mean, he's probably not gonna be here till June. Probably not going to set it up for this year. So this year, we're kind of just doing as we have been, but maybe for
Yeah.
the fall and winter, we'll change it.
And that's fine, but technically, we can't take any action, anything today, but, you know, Gary has left. Does somebody else have his report?
Gary left. I don't necessarily know a whole lot about what he's doing on the tree removal and replacements as far as where they're going. I can tell you our Arbor Day celebration is on Friday. We're only going to be planting one big tree, and down on Sam's by the Esquire. The nurseries have not hit the ground running quickly this year, and so some of our trees are going to be delayed and some of our plantings. But what I can tell you is we're going to be planting 15 trees throughout the downtown core, kind of in areas where they were before, and kind of reintroducing, fixing the sidewalks, and bringing tree grates in, whatnot. And we're scattering that through the whole downtown core, and so you'll definitely see those. They probably aren't going to materialize till June. And along with that, we'll also be continuing with the lighting. There'll be 5 new light posts that go up this year as far as our new lighting program as well downtown. Really, there's not a whole lot to add there. I mean, you know, we've I have X number of dollars to use, and the trees are about $1,000 a piece. It sounds very high, but by the time I do the concrete work, buy the grates, buy the tree, and get it in, that's about what the costs are. So you can see that that's about 15 grand right there, and the lights are not cheap, as we all know. So we're moving forward as we can. We're going to try to go after some grants here in the near future to do some more streetscape improvements, bike racks and benches and other things to kind of enhance the downtown. So welcome to attend if you're around at 12 noon on Friday. Just on the east side of the Esquire. Can't miss it. We'll be standing out there with a big tree. So you're welcome to attend. But yes, we are going to organize. I'm going to work with Gary on organizing this board, and whether or not we just make it strictly the planning commission running it. I didn't want to do that initially. I mean, yes, I did, but I didn't because I didn't want to step on the toes of the folks that actually had been on the board before. So I wanted to give that opportunity.
Well, there's a reality that we need to address. Any urban forestry questions for Mr. Hadley? Yes? Okay. All right. I'm hearing no questions, so. Or if we had one more P&Z member here, we'd be okay. But, okay. Have a good day, everybody.